Hi, my name is Ryan Gonzalez, and I'm with Cy. I am the Senior Global Director of Solutions Engineering for Cy. My main charter is to go around the world, talk with prospects and customers, and educate them on cyber risk quantification. So what I want to take the time in this next 30 minutes is kind of understanding on how you take your cybersecurity and turn it into a profit, building a program that boosts ROI. One of the things I want to point out here is what we're finding globally. These are some of the questions that we're hearing from CISOs. These are things that we're getting from conferences, phone calls, Teams meetings, etc. And some of the questions are, what are the chances that my organization will be the victim of a cybersecurity attack? Well, we all know what the answer to that is. It's when. Is kind of when it's going to happen, if it hasn't already happened, and do you have the visibility to know that it's happened? That's the key part that we want to point out there. Even if my organization is targeted, what would it cost me? Most people, when they go through, and most organizations look at it as from a risk perspective of getting cyber insurance, having a blanket coverage, and thinking that's going to cover all of the costs for the organization. Yes, it could go in and cover everything that you need to maybe get back up and running from an operational expense. But what is the actual cost to business? What does it cost to your reputation if you were to go down for 2 months or 2 weeks, 2 hours in e-commerce? There's going to be a huge amount of reputation damage, especially if you're losing customer information. Does this potential justify hiring cybersecurity experts and purchasing cybersecurity solutions to reduce it? Do I have enough people? Do I need more tooling? That's something that we hear a lot. Is cybersecurity tooling going to sit there and solve your problems if you don't have the right people? And having the right people without the cybersecurity tooling, is that actually going to solve your problem? The answer is probably not. You're going to have to sit there and make investments in understanding where your risk is, putting solutions in purposefully rather than buying things because Gartner is putting it out to you, and then making hires strategically to have people that are pinpoint in understanding the risks, how to mitigate risks in your environment, and how also to build programs around it. So it's not going to be solved just by individuals, but it's going to be solved by individuals that are tailored to the specific needs that you're looking for. Cyber risk quantification helps you build the business case to present to boards, to present to C-levels, and give them an understanding of this is what I need, this is why I need it, and if I don't get it, this is what the risk is to our organization. So cyber risk quantification helps answer all of these questions, but in a strategic plan, in a way that's actually consumable to non-technical individuals within the organization. Fact one, there's a high likelihood you will be breached. Everyone knows that. For every email that goes out and every email that's received, there's a possibility of a phishing attack. There's a possibility that in that phishing attack, the lack of process and controls internally or even internal training will lead to an attack. The question is, will you know, and do you have the resources and the availability to actually handle that attack in a timely manner? So 29%, of organizations reported material impact to cyber incident in the previous 12 months. Now, those are 29% that reported it. Those are people that identified it, that had it found, that had a government organization pointed out to them. There are still plenty of organizations that do not report them because they're not aware of them. I asked a question, how many times in the news do you hear about a breach happening and the attackers were in the infrastructure for a year plus? Those are things that we want to point out. Understanding where your risk is, the gaps in controls within your organization is going to be key to map that out so you're not part of the 29% going forward. A third of organizations, can expect to be breached this year. So that's probably correct. That's something that's I look at as probably one of the most factual things here is it's not if, it's when. And it all depends on how your controls and everything else are put in place on how you're able to rebound from it to go forward. So, scary part about this is everyone in this room, if you have a cybersecurity program, you are probably being looked at by someone out there. So you want to sit there and make sure that you have everything in place. So you are no longer just having to be defensive, but you can also be offensive and look at how you're going to track your risk and profile throughout the organization. Fact, cost of breach is higher for large organizations. Well, it's kind of a known fact. The bigger you are, the more you're going to pay, the more disruption to business it is, more loss of revenue that you're going to have. This right here is telling, because larger organizations, even though they are larger, what we've seen and what I've seen is a lot of times they're in the maturity state as some of the smaller organizations. So their cost of breach when it does happen is going to be much larger and impactful to them than it would be for a smaller one. Reputation at scale is going to be impacted. So $4.45 million is what IBM is predicting what's the average cost of breach globally. That's important to understand. That's important to sit there and do the research and find out, is my current cybersecurity policies that we hold today, is it going to cover this? Are we overcovered, undercovered? Do we need to make adjustments? And then you look at the other side over here. A company with the revenue of about $500 million is about $48 million, almost $49 million to sit there and take that breach on. This is going to be a cost of breach that is not really taking into effect the reputational damage, the disruption to business. This is just saying, how do we get business back up and operational? Those are some of the key things that we want to understand is when a breach does happen and what your cyber insurance covers is, it's not going to cover some of that loss of revenue. It is not going to cover the people that do no longer want to do business with you because you've lost their information, not for the first time, but maybe for the second. Those are key numbers to understand. The exposure for large organizations is more than 14. Now, when we talk about exposure and we talk about cost of breach, two different numbers. Cost of breach is what you're expected to pay out. The exposure is, what does your current risk in your environment actually lead to? What type of mitigations and controls can I get put in that can actually decrease my $14 million of risk exposure that I have? And when we talk about risk exposure and we talk about cyber risk quantification, we want to think about some of the lack of controls that are in place, the hygiene practices when we're building up or setting up developed environments in the cloud. Every one of those has a risk that goes towards those breach costs of $48 million. Okay. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I didn't make this slide. This is very mathematical for me, but you guys are going to take a look at this and explain how we're getting this information. Likelihood of breach, cost of breach, and exposure. When we're taking all of this information here, it's giving you those numbers within the platform to understand exactly what you should be looking at. As such, the expectancy and loss of organizations with revenue of $500 million starts at 14.1. The figure rises as revenue of the company rises. So now you're $1 billion, you double that. Now you're $2 billion, you're going to sit there and add an additional amount of value to that. These are the key things that we want to look at. As cybersecurity professionals, one of the things that we've been conditioned to do for the last 20 years is identify risk as a 1 to a 5 within the organization. We're looking at criticality. We're not looking at the business impact. For a future state, in order to have those high-level conversations, get the budgets you need to be able to be productive and defend your organization, it's going to have to be talked in numbers. The business is going to move based upon business functions and what the exposure and cost of the business is going to be. So it's very key that we understand this. One of the things that I see is everyone has a great understanding, whether it be through risk registers and everything else within their organization, of where that risk resides. But the prioritization of it, where do you focus your time and energy? What is the level of effort? Those are some of the things that are actually not taken into account to looking at what a cost of breach is within your environment. Your cyber insurance may not provide the coverage you need. Once again, what we were talking about, what I just mentioned earlier is, you will have a defined policy for $10 million. Your breach is going to cost you $9 million to get back up, implement your DR recovery systems, etc. But what about that loss of revenue? That loss of revenue cannot be made back up. You need to understand that your cyber insurance is only going to cover what you actually ask it to cover. So you need to be very prescribed when you're looking at your cyber insurance policies. If you're oversubscribing because you think it's going to help you, you might just be paying extra. Okay? Okay. According to a report, 80% of insured companies that suffered a data breach did not have a significant coverage, and there was an average of $27 million of uncovered losses. Those losses, like I said again, these are losses to business. This is not just getting the lights turned back on in the organization. That part, I hate to say it, is probably the easiest part, is to do the cutovers, implement DR. It's hard to get customers back. It's hard to get people to come back and start utilizing it again. If you're in distribution, if you cannot get trucks on the road for a level of F time, you are losing revenue that whole time. That's some of the parts that cyber insurance is not going to cover for you. A robust cybersecurity program can help. Now, robust is subjective. What is robust to me may not be robust to you. We want to understand we need to build cybersecurity programs of not what we are being told to do, but what we need to do for our particular organization. So if we are going to sit there and subscribe to a framework, we want to make sure we stick to that framework, but also understand that it is going to be scalable to your organization. We can't be thinking that we have to have every cybersecurity tool in place just to do it. Many cybersecurity tools or even processes are going to sit there and allow you to do compensating controls and actually help build your cybersecurity program here. So this is key to understand. It is not a one-size-fits-all. A smaller company, traditional thing, doing NIST mapping, etc., might work for them. Having the proper tooling might work for them. When you get to a large organization, that is at scale. You have to be able to sit there and be agile and adapt your cybersecurity program, not only to the outside threats, inside threats, but also to market needs and demands. Okay? I'm not going to read all of this. I'll give you guys a second here to read through this. So one of the things I want to point out here is bullet number 3. I talked about compensating controls. If you are going to sit there and focus on every risk and vulnerability in your environment, you are going to have a project that is never going to end. But if you take a compensating control method here and implementing a strong password policy, you have now probably mitigated a good portion of your risk. Therefore, some of those risks that of high or less critical value might actually be able to sit there and be put on a project list rather than being directly looked at today. So that's cool. Key to look at is not just because it is not only because someone is telling you that it's critical, but is it critical to your organization? How do you know if your cybersecurity program provides ROI? One, and I'm here to sit there and tell you this. No cybersecurity program will remove the risk of a data breach completely. Impossible. You cannot have zero risk. There will always be risk within the organization. A good indicator of ROI is if your investment in a cybersecurity program costs between 1 to 10% of possible exposure reduction. So when we think about exposure reduction, if your exposure is $100 million, and it's going to cost you $10 million to go through and remediate all of this information here, you're saving the company money from a risk perspective. Okay? If it's going to cost you $150 million to decrease $100 million, you are costing the company money. So having this understanding is going to be key going forward. Ultimately, the ROI of a cybersecurity program depends greatly on its effectiveness. Everyone wants to build a world-class cybersecurity program. But what is world-class to you? Going back to my previous statement that I made earlier, this is the thing. We want to build cybersecurity programs that are doable, attainable, and we have the resources to actually complete the tasks that we need. If we set cybersecurity programs and we want a maturity score, for instance, of a 5, very hard to get to. You are going to expend a lot of time, money, and resources to get to that 5. So make sure it's attainable. And what I want to do is use the remaining bit of time that we have here is to show you how we do it at Cy. Perfect. So what I want to point out here on this dashboard that we're showing is we have a couple key pieces here. In the middle here, we have what is a total cost of breach. This is a part where we want to get in depth and have an understanding of your company, what controls you have in place, what is your business function, which vertical or industry are you operating in, what type of information are you trying to protect? Is it PII, PHI, patient records, etc.? Every one of those has a different monetary value. Every one of those holds different types of insurance regulations towards them and has a different set of fines with them. So when we look at the cost of breach, we want to look at those 5 key pillars that we have in there. Everything from employee information all the way down to reputation. When we think of cost of breach, we don't want to look at this in a lens of just from what the cybersecurity companies are doing. We want to get an understanding of how these break down and where you should look at how this money is going to be spent. This information that is collected here is directly from information, about 289,000 different data points collected over 14 years, information from actual insurance actuaries and the Ponemon Institute. We take the information about the organization. We want to identify from your cost size, from your company size, your business revenue, etc., is what you should actually expect to pay out during and expend during a breach. We look at the key part down there, which is company losses. If we know this is you are a web retailer, we know that a DDoS, any other type of service disruption to the organization is going to begin decreasing your revenues. So these are key things that we want to point out. This would be one of the first things that from a CISO perspective, reports that I would put in my back pocket. When I go talk to my CFO or my board, I would be able to present this. Are we currently insured enough today? Based upon industry standards and these 3 highly reputable data sources shows that we are not. So this is going to be key when we look at it. We want to break the understanding of what assets are in the environment. Traditionally, people go through and start looking at assets as being a desktop, a laptop, a server. We want to look at it a little bit differently, but still bringing those into context. We want to look at everything from external facing domains, IP addresses, URLs, email addresses that maybe have been exposed to dark web. These are things that will be an asset to your organization. How are these assets brought into our platform? How are these assets valued to you? If you've ever done a risk assessment, a pen test, etc., these are static documents. You are going to live off of these documents until you either complete them and create another reporting metric for them. We're able to sit there and drag and drop all of this information directly into our platform, start classifying it based upon the information that we have, the mathematical equations we run behind the scenes, and start assigning, the sources of them, but also if there is a risk associated with them. Any data source within the environment that is API connectable will be ingested into the platform, CMDBs to AD. Once we have a full asset catalog, and this will not replace a CMDB, we are looking directly for assets that could have a risk or a vulnerability on them. We look at all of what we call as findings. So if you've ever had a pen test and you get that report back, they are not saying you have vulnerabilities, they are saying you have findings. This is what we found in your environment and this is what needs to be remediated. What I want to point out on this top one here, which is insufficient monitoring of intrusive activities on endpoints. That's a key one. But what I want to point out over here is the second column here of the risk reduction if this actually is mitigated. About a $1.7 million risk reduction from your organization if you mitigate that simple task. The other part that we want to point out here is how do you know and how do you start prioritizing this from a manpower perspective? We know that this is going to be a low-level effort and there's a cost associated with it. So return on investment, it's going to cost me $5,000 to decrease my risk by $1.7 million. That is what we can already start talking about with the board levels. This is how we justify spend for additional tooling and manpower resources. Breaking it down, all of your risks and findings within the organization into an easy to read and digest framework. We're going to tell you the top things that you should begin to block today. What is the level of effort? What is the cost associated with them? But when we look here at probability, what is the probability that this exploit will actually be initiated within your environment? We look at a couple of key factors when we talk about probability. What is the complexity of the attack? What is the availability, popularity, and I think I said complexity. But we look at all of these different factors to sit there and say, based upon all these known entities, based upon what we're running behind the scenes through our sandboxes and our tooling and what we're seeing in the wild, there's a good possibility that if an attacker was to get in your infrastructure, he could actually get this. Even if this attack or this vulnerability or risk was not at the edge, this is still going to be a lateral jumping point throughout the organization as they look to navigate into your important sensitive information. We want to identify the key business units that we're looking at. We are no longer looking at things from a device perspective at risk and vulnerability. We're looking at impact to key information about your business, employee information down to reputation. All of this information here can be rank scored depending on the company itself to figure out which one is a top priority and which one is not. But as you can see, each one has a cost of breach next to it, along with that exposure. So that exposure is saying that we have this many findings within our organization that could actually lead to somebody getting to my employee information. Last part here, who are the people that are trying to get this information? Internal attackers, outside, third-party vendors, all of these different things are a threat to your environment. The key part is to identify them and figure out where they actually live in that attack chain. When we are done with this, and I'm going to apologize in advance, this is going to, if you need glasses, put them on. If you don't need glasses, you will after this. What we're going to do is show you how we took those findings and broke them into an attack graph. We're not looking at an attack graph from the endpoint perspective, the server perspective. We're looking at the attack graph from the lens of an attacker on how they're going to use all your risks and vulnerabilities in your environment, your lack of process and controls to navigate from the left side all the way to your critical information that you're trying to protect within the organization. Now, this looks like a lot of information here. There's a lot of findings. Every time you get a pen test, every time Tenable runs a scan, you're going to get new information. But what we want to do is we want to look at it a couple different lenses. If you want immediate return on investment, let's look at the lowest effort ones. How many low-level items can I do that are going to require limited complexity to complete, limited manpower, and resources to get done? Those will we'll show you there. But what if I want to sit there and focus a little bit differently? And I want to look at my critical to block. As you can see here, we have actually grayed out everything to the right. We've now actually found the endpoint or the end part of the attack that is going to sit there and say, everything in front of this, I don't really need to patch today. Everything to the right of it, I don't need to either. What I need to do is focus on this particular vulnerability, this risk, gives me the information about it, tells me what my decrease in exposure is going to be, and I build a plan for all of my critical to block. When we go through building a plan, and as you can see, automatic plans, it's going to tell you what you need to do to your critical to blocks, okay? A lot of times things are subjective. What is critical? I don't know. We're going to sit there and help assist in that piece there. But we're going to show you here that if we focus on 9 key findings, 22 data assets within the company that require remediation, we are going to decrease our risk by $56 million. So I put this into context. If I only have to remediate 9 vulnerabilities within my platform, in all of my environment, that's a lot different when you think about it from all of those things sitting in Qualable and Tennis, those 4,000 things that came out on Patch Tuesday that you have to look at. Just because it came out on Patch Tuesday and they're critical, doesn't mean that there's a low-level risk or vulnerability that I could patch ahead of it and introduce a compensating control. Those are the things that we want to point out in the platform. Once again, we want to sit there and point out building business plans. We know how many people are going to require to do this. I know how many extra dollars I need to ask for, pounds, etc., to get the resources to actually do this. If I need to go out and ask finance to sit there and say, I need to contract my Salesforce people to come help me change our password complexity today. Well, now I have an understanding of what I need to do. All of these things here, even though they are only 4 items, these are high-level items. These are high-touch things that impact the whole organization. Think about Active Directory here. If you forced a reboot on everybody to change their password, that's a disruption to business. But if you have the justification behind it and the quantification of what you're going to save from a dollar perspective, now it's easier to get approval to do that for that impact during business hours. So building plans out, understanding where your risk exposure is going to go is one thing. But the other part that we want to look at is maturity. What are you doing from a maturity standpoint? How do I take all of those findings, all of those remediations that I'm doing, and actually make them make sense into my platform? So utilizing NIST, ISO, DORA, etc., we're able to sit there and map to those different security frameworks. Those pen tests, those assessments that we're bringing into the platform, what we're able to do is ingest them into our platform and start filling out your NIST assessments. Okay? Everything from what type of technologies do you have, what processes and controls are in place, and if there are findings associated with it. So as you remediate things or you introduce new controls or processes, you're going to watch a maturity score go from 2.4 to 2.6. If you decrease or we find findings that you have misconfigured firewalls or you have EDR that is on alert only, you're going to see your NIST scores drop because those controls have been removed from the environment. So what we want to point out on this part here is NIST should not be a point-in-time solution that you do annually. This should be something that you're road mapping throughout the year to actually focus on your maturity going forward. These are some of the key parts that we want to point out. And once again, we want to sit there and have a lot of user interaction. We want you to be able to manipulate the scoring. Well, I have this control in place, identify it and put it in. But if you put that control in place and you change your NIST scoring, well, based upon the integrations and the other information that we're getting into our platform, we might push you back because you actually didn't remediate that. Or we might actually push you forward because you went through and self-scored yourself at a 2 everywhere. You actually might be a 2.7 and didn't even realize it based upon all that information that you had that you provided us. So with that, I'm going to go back to my high-level dashboard here, talking about the return on investment, understanding mitigation success trends. How do you have a conversation and tell them that in quarter 1 or month 1, I decreased our exposure by this. This is what my vulnerability and risk teams are doing. This is what my network teams are doing. Okay, looking at the exposure reductions, once again, not only decreasing the cost of breach, which impacts your cyber insurance, but your actual exposure. These are the key things that we want to identify. This also points out to you if there are other projects or something else that happened during that piece. There's explainable periods of telling you why those disruptions to your patching remediation processes happened. Same thing with maturity trends. Understanding where you sit in each one of the security domains is going to be key going forward. These are all reportable things that are going to help justify budget, get the tooling and the resources that you need going forward. Okay? And with that, I have 2 minutes left. I'm going to open it up to any questions that you guys may or may not have about the platform or the presentation that I gave earlier. Go.
Let's assume that there is a virtual company and they are just starting their cybersecurity investment. What should be the role of this company to achieve this goal? Have a proper cybersecurity program in their company.
So, new company coming up. One of the first things that I would do if it was a new company coming up is to take a look at the investments that I'm making sure that the controls that we are actually putting in place are actually fitting the need and not just what the market is telling me. If I'm a cloud-based company only, do I need to have the same controls as a company that has brick and mortar stores and everything else? No. I'd want to sit there and follow one of the frameworks. I'd probably follow something like DORA out there and follow a DORA framework that's going to allow me to sit there and align properly. Investing in the right tooling is one thing. I think when we look at this going forward is if you start your cybersecurity maturity, your program 2 years after the inception of the company, you're already too late because you're going to be playing catch up the whole time. So the key that we always find is, unfortunately, we don't get new companies. I mean, there's not too many new companies coming up that we're working with. We're getting companies that are built on legacy, and we're having to sit there and say, how do we get you from where you've been, that you spent 20 years breaking, how do we fix it in, let's say, a year, and to bring it into that state there? And what we do is building it on process, understanding what they're doing, what they've done in the past that was wrong, so that going forward, we can continue mapping towards maturity, but we can also look at and explaining, just because Microsoft says it's bad, you don't even have that system. Why do you care? Why are you patching? You don't have those applications. So those are time and energy that you probably don't have to expend, because one of the common myths out there is employees are free. They're actually not. Every employee costs money, and every time you take them out of the field to do something, it's company resources that they'd be putting somewhere else. Okay? Yes?
This is a SaaS proposition, right?
What was that?
It's a SaaS proposition.
Yes.
So, right. Is there any, where does the data reside actually?
So,
Company in the Netherlands.
company in the Netherlands. So the data would actually reside on AWS in the Netherlands.
All right.
Yeah. So we are going to be region-based, based upon where those companies are, because of the specific laws for each country.
And this is already currently the reality of
Correct.
all right.
Yes. So this, yeah. Yep.
If you look at the controls,
Mhm.
is there a possibility to overlap it?
Correct.
So that you don't have to, let's say, apply to NIS in the whole suite, and then to NIS 2, for instance.
Correct.
Does it collect?
So we are able to sit there and mix in the two, NIST and let's say DORA. We can actually mesh those together for the controls. There are overlapping, overlap,
Exactly.
yes.
Yeah.
So we can do that, yes. Yes. Yep. Right. All right. With that, I want to thank everybody for coming here. We are down in the Israeli pavilion, so if you do want a hands-on demo, talk about your environment, how we can help you, please come by. Thank you.